Hello and welcome back. You see me picking some real apples here because today we're making Steel Apple Awards for my friends over at Carhartt. They're awarding these to 5 high school vocational teachers who have gone above and beyond to help prepare the next generation for careers in the skilled trades. The 5 recipients are from all over the country and are being recognized for making significant positive impacts on their students, helping them secure skilled trade jobs following their graduation. These awards will be a lasting symbol of the hard work and dedication these teachers display in the classroom every day. It's an exciting project to honor these teachers who are helping to close this skilled trades gap, and I'm honored to be a little part of it. You've been watching me make a mold. This is called Petrobond, this red clay. It's more like sand soaked in oil. It's not exactly clay, but it feels like it. And the Petrobond will keep the shape of the apple. And I'm using a real apple because I thought about the concept of making a mold of it and then using that same apple as my form each time. But I figured if I can do it carefully with a real apple, I don't have to worry about cutting it in half. Because typically when you make this type of mold, your form is usually in 2 pieces. So you can tightly pack one half, add the second half, and then close the flask, which would be the wooden part, and then tightly pack the second half and pull it apart. And then both halves would be in each side. You gently pull them out. You could Google this. This is typically how it's done. But by using the one apple, you see here, I'm able to gently pull it out. And then any discrepancies will be a positive on the mold, which I could sand off later. And now I'm using the brass tubes from K&S simply to just make a fill spot and then a vent hole. And you see how nice and cleanly it cuts. So now I have the mold. I flip it over gently. And you never know, these molds could leak when you pour the material in it, so you got to keep the weights on there. These are heavy weights I just get from the steel mill nearby. And now this is pewter. It's a mix of lead and tin, and it melts at 400 degrees. I'm cutting it apart on the bandsaw. It makes it a little bit easier to handle when I'm melting it in the crucible. Are sold by the pound. These ingots are sold by the pound. What you see there is it's about 2 pounds per ingot. The individual segment is about 2 pounds. I'm using a rosebud oxyacetylene there, and that gets it up pretty hot. And now you see here I'm able to take it and just pour it straight in there. So each apple uses about 5 to 6 pounds worth of this pewter. And it was discovered when I made my very first one that I needed so much. I kept having to pour more and more in. And now that it's cooled off for probably about 10 minutes, I pull it out, and it's really important to keep this Delft clay clean and contained, and I keep this dedicated bin. I don't want it to dry out. It can dry out if you leave it open, and then it becomes somewhat useless. And it can you can use it over and over again, which is why I keep it contained to keep that oil moist in there. And now you see the apple straight out of the mold. It's got a couple little dimples on it. I brush it off. You could certainly see the seam and obviously the fill spouts. Those will get cut off in a minute. But it needs to be worked quite a bit. Now I'm making a second one. You could see my prototype there off and to the left. And that was the one that I had to pour several layers. But the layers melted right into each other while everything was still very hot. And that's how I knew that I would need at least 6 pounds per pour. But you notice me using the spackle knife there to be able to get a nice clean flat surface. Of course, the powder keeps the 2 different halves of the mold from sticking together. And it's really important that you pack it as tightly as you can and then also level it off so that when you turn it over, your mold is sitting flat on the table. And by packing it tightly, obviously, you're not going to get any leaks. I'm just using a steel rod to use as a rolling pin there. And also these flat pieces of steel just help tamp it all down. And I made 6 of these all together. And now I pull it apart, and the mold is very fragile at this point because it's just compacted sand. You want to be very gentle. Any little bump and debris that would fall into the mold will create a divot. So we've got to be really careful. And then I also gently blow everything out. Again, there's my fill spot and my vent. It's really important that when you pour the liquid metal in there, that it has the gases can escape through the vent hole. And also when they both fill completely up, you know that the mold is full. And like I said, it's important to keep this locked down. I could screw it, but the vibration of screwing could also damage the mold. make it shake apart. So I just put the gently put the weights on there, and it'll keep everything trapped shut. And I mixed up some more stuff there, and you can see I'm just pouring it in there. It's obviously very hot. It's about 400 to 500 degrees right there. Cools very fast, and then I get right to work by pulling it apart. The apple contains the heat. It's pretty interesting, even though all 5 of these now that I cast in this moment in time, each one of them was still very, very warm. The heat is solidly contained deep within there. Now I got to begin to prep them to be finished. First thing I got to do is cut off that sprue there at the bottom. I also need to begin to sand the flange off there. The sprue gets put back into the mix. It will get remelted and turned into something else, maybe more apples down the road. But it's important to have a good fill spot, so don't ever worry. You can always cut it off later. Anything that's a positive on the mold is okay because it could be just filed or ground or polished off later. Now I'm using my AmeriBraid grinder to get rid of the flashing at the seam. There's always going to be a little flashing at the seam. It's nearly impossible, especially with the Delft clay. It kind of tends to crumble a little bit in sharp points. So if you have that sharp edge, it's going to give up a little bit. And I palm sand everything. And I found when I played around with what type of finish to give it, I found that when I put it on the wire wheel, it brought it almost back to what felt like the original waxed apple. So that's what I ended up doing here. So I just kept them all on the wire wheel. And it felt like it was just an apple painted silver, the way it almost looked. And now these are the hockey pucks that are going to become the bases. I didn't design the final look of this. This was given to me by Carhartt. I would assume maybe an ad agency or whoever they conceived this award with came up with the look. In the original concept, the logo was on the apple, and I suggested putting the logo on the base, and they liked that idea. And so by putting the logo on the base, you take it away, the apple stands alone, and the base, it almost is metaphorically and physically a foundation for the concept, and it's the foundation presented by Carhartt. So that's what I ended up doing. Those little rings I glued on there was simply so that I could hold it in the 3-jaw chuck for the laser etcher, which you're going to see in just a minute. But what I didn't realize, and I left completely out of the video because it was sort of unimportant, by laser etching this aluminum, each by EMP, which is Aeon Laser's parent company, by laser etching it, I needed to do it several times, and it created a tremendous amount of heat. So the puck got very hot and fell off of that little ring. So I ended up having to, off camera, drill and pin each one of those little rings on. So here you see a day's worth of laser etching. To get deep into any material with the fiber laser, any metal material, you need to really, really let it run. So that's 30, 40, 50 passes, I forget. But it's about 30 minutes each of passes, and then by the time that puck got very hot, the glue would have let go. So now I'm back on the lathe with the same holding device, that little piece that I pinned to the back of it, and I'm sanding it, polishing it. And if you notice, I didn't put a hash mark on the laser etch. I just did a straight line, and it gave me what felt like to me a fabric, which is appropriate, so I left it like that. And now it's time to make the stem and the leaf. And these are just basic blacksmithing techniques which you would learn on your very first day of blacksmithing. It's the type of thing you would learn on your first day, is how to make a leaf. And here you see me making a stem, and now I'm making the leaf. And I'm just using my cross peen, and I'm using the induction heater, which is a hard word to remember. And there's the leaf. So you could smush it, and then shape it a little bit. Now, with the welder, I'm attaching the leaf to the stem. And each one is the same as far as concept goes, but when you look up close, they're all have their own personality. And I was able to get about 2 castings per apple. So 2 look the same, the next 2 look the same, and the prototype and the first one look the same. And I'm drilling out, and then the stem goes in there, and then I just put a little thick CA glue to keep it in there. It kind of squeaks in there. And there it is. There's the polished apple. And now I'm at the stage here where I got to marry the apple to the aluminum. And you notice the slight difference in color. There you see me pulling off those pinned rings. And there it is. Now I need to drill up through the aluminum into the pewter. And in that case, I just drill everything on a drill press. And now here I'm just doing the set for the screw head. And I got to pre-drill everything, and I pre-drill it. And I'm using Robertson screws, and I hand tighten them in because I don't want to pull them in and then snap them, because there's not quite the same leeway you would have in a piece of wood. It's going to bottom out and break, so I got to do it by hand. But because it is pewter, I'm able to just use a wood screw. Just got to find the sweet spot as far as how big of a hole to drill. Now it's time to present these, and I wanted to make sure that they were individually wrapped, and I said, why not just make a box on Maker Case? I went to Maker Case and I made a simple box. And there's the boxes glued together from the CNC machine, and then I cut each one of them in half, but not before I put a little leather pad on the bottom of each one of these awards. I have lots of leather left over from all the different leather projects that I do, so I keep it around. And a little bit of tape while the CA glue cured is cool. These boxes I cut in half on the table saw, and I'm just using some scrap leather to make a hinge. And these boxes weren't a requirement, but I just felt it was important. Like I always try to promote the idea of presentation. If you're going to make anything, you don't want to tie it up and keep it kidnapped in bubble wrap. You want the experience. Think about the iPhone you bought, or the fancy piece of electronics you bought comes in a really sexy box, and it's the same concept. And this is my little closure idea that I often do. It's a hasp and a strip of leather. Now these boxes most likely are going to get used one time, maybe just put on the side like a cigar box you can't throw away. So I didn't want to get too crazy with these boxes. Like I said, I just want them to be a pretty presentation. And now here you see the final is with the laser etch logo. A little piece of fabric to take up some of the space versus putting in a piece of bubble wrap, which just, in my opinion, just wouldn't look very classy. And you'll notice I put a little bandsawed shelf in there to keep the award in place with a little bit of leather on it. And now there's the 5 final awards, which will be presented to teachers in time. You'll start seeing some social media on that. And this was a real fun one. And just having some fun with some selective focus. Carhartt, thank you very much. I'm honored that you would let me be a part of this project, and I'm proud of the way the award came out, and I hope it helps the cause. Thank you, Carhartt.